My name is Hemanth Kadambi. I'm an archaeologist and historian of ancient and medieval India. My major work, for which I earned a doctorate in Anthropological Archaeology from the University of Michigan, USA, is to do with the early medieval polity of the early Calukyas or the Badami Calukyas. I initiated a systematic archaeological survey project at the Early Calukyas Center of Aihol in the Bagalkot district of North Karnataka. The aim of this project was threefold. One, it was to expand the scope of the known history of the early Calukyas for the last 100 years or so, which was based mainly on epigraphic and art historical research and limited archaeological investigations. Secondly, I aim to raise significant anthropological questions from within Calukya history, that which was known and that which I was able to document, which may shift the focus from themes that have long been the focus of early medieval historians of South Asia, such as the nature of the urban society or lack thereof, organization of the state, variously characterized as feudal, decentralized, diffuse polities, etc. And the third aim of my project was to look beyond epigraphic studies and textual histories to generate an archaeological source for addressing historical and anthropological questions. I adopted a methodology that was explicitly interdisciplinary, drawing from anthropology, history, and art history in the main, and also investigating these sources dialogically. In other words, these sources are not simply independent ways of corroborating information as much as, when worked with together, can bring forth unique and nuanced understandings of particular questions. I raised the following questions about the early Calukyas. What was the relationship of the early Calukya period built environment to their past landscapes and its constructions, mainly Iron Age and early historic megalithic constructions? What was the nature of the settlement at Aihol beyond its more than 100 standing stone temples, of which only about 36 or so were constructed during the period of the early Calukyas? What status differentiation, if any, was forthcoming from the analyses of artifacts and the use of space? And finally, and perhaps most significantly, my doctoral dissertation in particular and subsequent research has been an inquiry of the religious affiliations among elites and non-elites as portrayed within the Binta environment at Aihol in particular, but also in the larger Malaprabha Valley region. So before I speak about the results of my project, I would like to say something about the design of my doctoral archaeological survey project. In order to undertake the investigation into the above questions, I decided to conduct a systematic archaeological survey at Aihol, which archaeologists refer to as a full coverage survey. I will explain that in a moment. The site of Aihol was chosen in part because it has some of the earliest constructions of the early Calukyas alongside earlier and later constructions, providing a longer time span of the built environment for my investigations. And secondly, Aihol is a modern village with vast tracts of agricultural lands surrounding the village itself, which afforded a convenient site for undertaking systematic field walks. So 3 to 4 individuals walked transects, or you can imagine that to be sweeps of the landscape in cardinal directions. And while doing so, we documented all artifacts of archaeological significance, such as fragments of pottery, stone tools, tile and brick fragments, iron slag, that is the residue of the smelting process, and the like. We also documented any architectural fragments, ruined architecture, small shrines that were typically under trees, and any evidence of water retention features or other types of architectural modifications in the Aihol landscape itself. As a result of these systematic field walks, which was done over 2 field seasons spread between 3 to 4 months each, and also a lot of these collections and the mapping of associated finds, the project yielded over 850 locations, which in a short hand can also be called sites, in only a 5 square kilometer zone. And this small zone, although very small compared to the 25 square kilometers that was earmarked as the entire survey area, is a fairly representative sample of the site in itself. More than 90% of the documented locations are pottery finds, with a few but significant sites with architecture, such as previously undocumented megalithic structures, a couple of memorial stone sites, some ruined architecture of both stone and brick, being the major other finds. Analysis of the pottery was multifold. I first categorized pottery fragments by color, texture, and design, collapsed into something called the wear class, and secondly into shape, roughly jars and bowls, which are a crude sort of proxy for indicators of vessel function as such. So this first level of categorization of the pottery was done to understand at a basic level the manufacturing technique of the vessels, in addition to the possible utility of these vessels, whether used for cooking or serving or storage or any combination of the three. This level of analysis of the smaller subset of the sample of pottery suggests that most of the pottery was relatively easily manufactured using locally available materials and was plain, almost mundane looking with minimal decorations. Indeed, this pottery is very similar to pottery documented at many sites across Karnataka and elsewhere in the subcontinent, which belong to a similar time period. And in fact, one of the hallmarks of the pottery from the middle of the first millennium is that it is so mundane looking and with minimal decorations that perhaps this might be the reason why it hasn't received significant attention and comment in the hitherto archaeological reports over the years. I hope to make some change to that situation, starting with this project of mine. Most of the pottery I analyzed functionally fall into the relatively crude functional classification, as I mentioned, of cooking and mostly storage vessels rather than serving vessels. But beyond this level of analysis of pottery, I also undertook a spatial classification of the ratio of the presence of jars to bowls across the surveyed area of Aihol. This exercise revealed that there are minor variations in the presence of jars and bowls across the surveyed area, suggesting the relative variations in the functions of pottery in various parts of the site, of Aihol that is. Much more work needs to be done in order to sustain this observation, but as a first step, this is a significant result which provides a unique opportunity to understand the nature of activity going on at Aihol in the mid-1st millennium CE. Moreover, the pottery analysis has also revealed that apart from the temple and ritual and religious landscape of Aihol itself, there is a lot more mundane activity with the local population that's happening in the area. So, in addition to artifactual analysis as outlined just now, I also was able to make significant observations in my investigations of the landscape and architecture and the religious affiliations of Calukyan temples and the larger sociological context of the Calukyan era. Aihol, as most scholars have recognized over the last century, has been seen as a cradle of Indian temple architecture. This is mainly due to the presence of not just a number of early Calukya stone temples, many of which still stand today, but also because this site has a progression of all identified stages in the evolution of early Calukya temple architecture. And most of the scholarship from abroad and in India itself has paid particular attention to this aspect of the architecture, especially at Aihol. Therefore, it's hardly a surprise that the history of the landscapes of the early Calukyas in general, and Aihol in particular, is the history of their art and architecture. Likewise, the more than 150 inscriptions of the early Calukya ruling house in the form of stone tablets or pillars in and around temple regions and copper plate inscriptions has been the source of historical knowledge of the early Calukyas. Hence, while there is very good information accumulated over the decades for this ruling house, the nature of this knowledge, ironically, fails to provide a dynamic picture to the period of the early Calukyas. For instance, we know the religious affiliations of the early Calukya kings and queens varied, because we learn that from their inscriptions. We also know that they patronized religious communities and places other than their own personal religious preferences. However, we are less certain of the relationship and the impact of these variations within the royal household or in the relationship between royalty and non-royalty. Crucially, there is very little that we know of the nature of non-elite engagement with religion per se and their engagement, or lack thereof, with the religious preferences of elites. My research has been able to make significant contributions to these questions. So, perhaps the best known aspect of the early Chalukya rulers is their engagement with religion. So besides Hindu, Buddhist and Jain shrines, there is a lot more that my research has been able to uncover in the early Chalukya landscapes in the Malaprabha Valley. So in a way, as mentioned previously, much of what is known about the early Chalukya religion is known from their inscriptions and their architecture and iconography. This scholarship with regards to both architecture and inscriptions is both diverse and nuanced, and these two sources of information are still the major focus of research. So apart from Hindu, Jain and Buddhist pantheons well attested to and well represented in historical scholarship, and this also finds parallel among other contemporaries of early Chalukyas such as the Pallavas, the Gangas and other minor dynasties in Karnataka, the Andhra, Telangana and Maharashtra regions. What is less known, however, is what religious and sacred contexts, other than the ones just outlined above, may have existed. Did non-elites prescribe to the religious precepts of the royalty or other elites? We know from inscriptions that merchants had their own deities who may have also been patronized by Chalukya royalty. But did non-elite groups such as agriculturalists or pastoralists also participate in the same sacred spheres as royalty or merchants? My research and documentation of the early Chalukya landscape has suggested that non-elites, and pastoralists in particular, may have had distinct religious preferences, but which, significantly, were acknowledged and perhaps even co-opted by the Chalukya royalty. The deity concerned here is Lajja Gauri. It is widely known in the existing scholarship that the Chalukyas claim to be nourished by the 7 divine mothers or the Saptamatrika. Indeed, there are numerous temples enshrining Saptamatrika in the early Chalukya realm. Sculptural representations of Lajja Gauri are also clearly attested to this period from numerous sites in the Malaprabha Valley and beyond. However, the worship or religious status of this goddess is not known from either the main temples of the Chalukyas or from their inscriptions. My investigation was able to resolve this apparent lacuna when I investigated this issue, bringing together a dialogical understanding of pastoral ethnography, epigraphy, and archaeological investigations of early Chalukya landscapes. To state it briefly here, mythology of the present-day North Karnataka, Maharashtra pastoral communities recall the goddess called the Mother of 7, or Yel Makkal Thai, in other words, Yallamma. Yallamma is a well-known deity all over the Deccan, with a significant site of annual pilgrimage in the Belgaum district, about 100 kilometers west of Badami, the erstwhile capital of the early Chalukyas. Yallamma is worshipped mostly by pastoral groups, but also agricultural communities who congregate at this temple at Saundatti from all over the Deccan. Badami's sandstone cliffs reckon the narrative imagery of the Yallamma legend of pastoralists in her fight against Kalubhairava, in the process, while in the course of trying to rescue the gods who were imprisoned by Yallamma. Moreover, Badami is also the site of an 11th century temple dedicated to Yallamma, attesting to the strong presence of pastoral groups in the region. It isn't then much of a stretch to see Yallamma and Saptamatrika as corresponding deities in the Puranic and non-Puranic realms. In addition, Puranic mythology relating to the episode of Parashurama beheading his mother Aditi or Renuka, the mother of all the gods, who was brought back to life but without her head, provides a neat parallel to the iconographic depiction of Lajja Gauri. Lajjagauri images and sculptures in the early Chalukya realm are typically portrayed headless, the head replaced with a giant flower such as a lotus. The birth-giving posture of the female deity and the record of her worship suggests that she was a fertility goddess. Interestingly, internal evidence from the Chalukya architecture also suggests an emphasis on fertility worship as well. So, in a sense, the three deities, Saptamatrika, Yellama, and Lajjagauri, seem to form an interconnected sphere of local deities who were in worship, two of whom are well attested to from the archaeological, epigraphical, and architectural record of Chalukyas, namely Lajjagauri and Saptamatrikas. And Yellama providing the bridge between these two other female deities, and who today is well known to be a pastoral goddess and a significant goddess in the Deccan, forms the bridge, suggesting to me that non-elite religious affiliations of the early Chalukyas were equally important during the realm of the early Chalukya rule in South India. The above investigations thus has been able to present a nuanced and dynamic picture of the sacred landscape of the early Chalukyas and the various people who lived in the Malaprabha Valley during the first millennium CE. I hope to carry forward this research with more archaeological research, including excavations at different parts of Aihol and other sites in the Malaprabha region, to fine-tune questions of not just religious affiliations but also urban living and the interaction between the natural environment in the region and the built environment during the first millennium CE.